Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Former President Trump is in Ohio today visiting the town that's still on edge after the train derailment that left some of the town residents sick and many still on edge. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
Residents welcoming former President Trump to the small town of East Palestine, the area where a train carrying toxic chemicals derailed earlier this month. The visit an opportunity for Trump to reprise his role as president when he would often survey disaster damage. Trump visited Little Beaver Creek to inspect environmental damage, where he was briefed by newly elected Senator J.D. Vance, East Palestine Mayor Trent Conaway, and other state and local leaders.
To show our love and support for our fellow Americans in this hour of need, and that's what it is. It was an hour of need, but they've done some incredible work in a very short period of time, and they're getting a lot of credit for it, and they have to be.
3 weeks after the derailment, the smell of chemicals is mostly gone, but some residents close to the tracks say there's still an odor inside their homes. There's growing frustration among residents and local leaders about the federal government's response to their safety concerns after the derailment, which led to evacuations and fears of contamination of the community's air and drinking water. During the visit, Trump donated cleaning supplies and bottled water. Here's his message to the Biden administration.
Get over here.
Why do you think they waited, Mr. Trump? Do you think it had to do with the fact that
they waited for me?
Thank you for coming, Mr. Trump. Thank you, sir.
When I came, everybody decided to come, right? You know that. Nice to see you.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is now set to travel to East Palestine on Thursday. The administration defending the timing in a statement, saying that the secretary wanted to go when it is appropriate and wouldn't detract from the emergency response efforts. And some administration officials have dismissed Trump's visit today as simply a political opportunity. President Biden has not yet visited the city, although yesterday he did hold phone calls with officials from both Ohio and Pennsylvania. Biden said that call was meant to reaffirm his commitment to making sure that those officials and residents have everything that they need. On the other hand, Trump has accused Biden of walking away from residents in the deep red state. This trip by the former president and the contrast that Trump is trying to draw does sort of show a start of what could be a replay of a showdown between Trump and Biden for the 2024 presidential race. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
And the list of candidates for the 2024 presidential election is growing. In addition to former President Trump and Nikki Haley launching their campaigns, Vivek Ramaswamy is now throwing his hat into the ring. Ramaswamy is a former biotech executive, hedge fund partner, and author. He's heading to New Hampshire this evening to kick off his campaign. And President Biden wrapping up his Poland trip with a pledge to bolster NATO. Yet Russia is highlighting deepening ties with China in a meeting between Putin and Beijing's top diplomat. Here's NTD's Iris Tao from the White House.
Before concluding a momentous 3-day trip to Ukraine and Poland, President Biden met with leaders of countries along NATO's eastern flank and telling them they have the U.S.'s full support if any of them becomes a target of Russia.
As NATO's eastern flank, you're in the front lines of our collective defense. We will defend literally every inch of NATO.
The meeting in Poland took place among leaders of the Bucharest Nine, which includes countries like Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, all of which getting increasingly wary of Russia's aggression.
And you know better than anyone what's at stake in this conflict, not just for Ukraine, but for the freedom of democracies throughout Europe and around the world.
And Biden on Wednesday responded to Russia's pulling back from the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty. Here's what he said.
I don't have time.
No time?
No. Big mistake.
Meanwhile, Moscow is celebrating deepened ties with Beijing. China's top diplomat met with Putin at the Kremlin on Wednesday, telling the Russian leader that China's relationship with Russia stays strong despite international pressure.
China-Russia relations have withstood the test of the international situation and remained mature, tenacious, and stable as a mountain.
And Putin talked of reaching new milestones in Russia-China relations, as he said he was looking forward to Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow this spring. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And speaking of pandemics, the House Oversight Committee is in the midst of investigating the origins of the COVID-19 virus. Congressman Brad Wenstrup is the chairman of the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, and we're happy to have him joining us to discuss the investigation and what they are seeking. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Congressman, if I could just ask you, what is the House Oversight Committee and the Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic investigating regarding the origins of the COVID-19 virus?
Yeah, so specifically with the origins, although we're investigating every aspect of the pandemic itself, the economy, and the effects on our children and education, but specifically to the origins, we feel it's important to understand the evolution of really any deadly virus that may emerge across the globe or within our country. And the more we know, then whether it's lab or whether it's natural, the more we know about it, the greater ability we would have to protect ourselves in the future. And really for this committee, what our goals really entail in a nutshell is that we're going to do an after-action review and look at everything that took place during this pandemic and see what lessons we've learned, and really come up with what the best path forward will be going forward so that we can have preparedness and readiness. I like to say we're looking at 4 Ps down the road, hopefully that can be a benefit to America, and that's to be able to predict, to prepare, to protect, and to prevent, if we can, any future pandemic or epidemic, especially involving a virus like we saw with COVID.
Congressman, does the evidence point to gain-of-function research being conducted prior to the outbreak? And what are the scientific and ethical implications of this taking place? And I guess a follow-up to that, is the House of Representatives doing anything to pursue that specifically?
Yeah, I can tell you, I sit on the Intelligence Committee as well, and so the last couple of years I've been looking into a lot of this, especially as a physician sitting on the Intelligence Committee. But we go back to even 2005, and you see things where our State Department has said that China is working on bioweapons and so in a bioweapons lab, so we have concern. But you can go back to 2012, where Dr. Fauci in an interview was talking about gain-of-function type of research. And in that, he felt that the benefits of it outweighed the risk. I guess his theory was that if we can create a super infectious virus and cure it, then there's nothing we can't cure. And he was even asked at that time, is there a risk to something like this getting out of the lab? And he said, well, I think the benefits outweigh the risk, and the risk is really small. So we have a lot of concerns. And we also know in 2015, that Dr. Ralph Barrick in North Carolina was working with Dr. Xi Jinping over at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they were able to create what's called a chimera, which is essentially what gain-of-function research is, where you take components of 2 different viruses, put them together, and create a virus that may be more infectious. So the capability has been there, and it's been both present in the United States and in China. And so you see an outbreak coming from Wuhan, so certainly the concern is there. And like I said, whether something comes from nature or comes from the lab intentionally or accidentally, we would like to know the evolution of that so that we can do better in the future and be more prepared and able to take something on in a more professional manner than maybe we have been able to in the past, because our knowledge would be greater.
Congressman, lastly, I'd just like to ask you, you offer a rare insight into both, being a medical doctor and a veteran when it comes to all things coronavirus, really. But specifically with regard to vaccines, how concerning are some of the questions that have been starting to surface in terms of the side effects?
Well, we are concerned about that. And how are we collecting data and actually reporting on it? The vaccines were initially there for emergency use authorization. And I felt that the highest risk people, and we did understand somewhat who the high risk populations were and the comorbidities that might exist. But what are some of the adverse effects, and are we collecting the data accurately? One of the problems that I see that in the way that we've gone forward is we've broken the doctor-patient relationship. If you just look at the mandates, for example, the mandate says from a politician that you must get this shot or you're going to lose your job, Well, that's not a good alternative for people, and there's no doctor involved with this conversation. And people should have the ability to sit down with their doctor who would understand what their personal health is like, what kind of antibody levels do they have, and T cell levels do they have that may be giving them more immunity. And in some cases, it may be people that had natural immunity from having COVID and recovered from it. They may be more immune than someone who's been vaccinated. So these are all conversations that should take place within a doctor's office, and back it up with science before you make a recommendation whether someone gets the vaccine or not. And like any other drug, you have to talk about the potential side effects of it. That's been the standard in medicine, and it should be the same with the vaccines.
Ohio Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.